Welcome to the Blender Basics video tutorial series. This is Chapter 4, dealing with materials and textures. My name is Jim Chronister, and the Blender Basics book can be downloaded from www.cdschools.org/cdhs. Look under Staff My Name, you'll find the book. In material and textures, this is a big chapter. There's a lot that we can do. I'd recommend reading the chapter in the booklet and experimenting with some of the things on your own. Today we're going to focus mostly on applying materials and textures to the landscape and lighthouse scene. So we're going to get started by opening up a recent file. We're going to open up our landscape. And right now, when we did the landscape in a previous chapter, it's basically this big boring area. This will be our land. This will be our water area. If we hit F12 and render a picture right now, basically it's just a big gray glob. So to get it started, first thing we're going to do is add a plane that's going to represent our water. So let's switch to a top view. Make sure our 3D bullseye is somewhere about in the middle of our plane. And we're going to hit Shift A and add a mesh plane. And we're going to scale that plane to about the exact same size as our landscape. So S to scale, scroll it out. I'm going to switch to a number 1, a front view. And I'm going to hit G to grab, and I'm going to pull that plane up just a little bit above the bottom area so that the plane is going to be representing our water. So let's look at basic material settings. With this plane selected that's going to represent our water, I'm going to maximize out our properties windows here. And you can see with our property menus going across, we have our render settings, scene settings, world, object, constraints, modifiers, object data. If I continue to scroll across by holding down my mouse wheel, I can finally get to the material panel and the texture panel. You always have to apply material before you apply a texture, so let's get started with materials. So if I click on the material panel, I get a blank panel up here with a new button. Okay, let's hit new. We're going to add a new material. Right in here I can give it a name, and it's probably a good idea to get used to naming your materials. I'm just going to call this water. And now that displays it here as a water material. Okay, if I begin by maximize this out a little bit. If I begin by scrolling down the list, what do you see when you go into materials? Surface, wire, volume, halo. Wow, what did we do with all of this? Well, if I do it as a wire, it's going to display this thing as a wireframe, and sometimes that's a neat effect. Usually you want to keep it on surface. And we'll talk about halo in a little bit of a different setting, but when you go into the halo effect, you turn your object into basically all of the vertices will be the only thing that you see, and you can make them glow like stars or just a foggy effect. There are a lot of different things you can do with halo. We're going to stick with surface for right now. You have a preview sample. You can change how your preview will be displayed. You can do different things with it. I'll keep it as a cube for right now. And as I scroll down through here a little bit further, all your different panels, and by the way, these panels can be minimized and maximized so that you can look at how things are going on. But diffuse is the actual color that you see given off of the object. If I click on the sample here, I bring up a color picker wheel, and since this is water, we're going to give it some type of a bluish, maybe pull my intensity down to a bluish gray. I want this to be like a dark and stormy night. So now it's a bluish gray. There's my sample. My viewports show that. If I hit F12 and render a new picture out, now I have a blue area in there that's going to represent the water. So what else can I do? Okay, specularity is the glossiness and the color that's given off in a glossy area. Intensity would be the glossiness intensity. If I drag that up, you'll have let's go back to a sphere selection. So under specularity, intensity will be, is it glossy or is it flat? And that's what you do with that. Since this is going to be water, we'll keep the intensity up pretty high, and I'm just going to keep that at white. I'm not going to really do anything else with that right now. In fact, there really isn't much that I'm going to mess with in here for materials for the actual water. So let's do the same thing for the ground. So I'm going to right click and select my ground plane. If I scroll back down here, I'll see my new box, and I'm just going to give this thing a name and call it ground. Now, since ground typically is not very glossy, I'm going to take my specularity and take the intensity down to nothing, pretty much, and it won't be glossy at all. Now, we're going to put a texture on this later on, but for right now, I'm just going to make it kind of a green, just to show you how it will show up in my scene. And we'll hit F12, we'll render a new picture, and now we have a green landscape and blue for water. So those are our basic material settings. Well, I actually want a texture rather than a color on this. So I'm going to go now over to my little texture panel up here at the top. So I click the texture panel. We hit add new for a new texture, and again I could give it a name. I'm going to kind of skip that right now. And right now it has a cloud texture on it. What does a cloud texture look like? If I hit F12 and render a new picture, you're going to see kind of a purplish pink color and now green. It's like, geez, where did the purple come from? Well, here's what's going on. Let's scroll all the way down this menu bar. And right here underneath the influence panel, you see where that purple comes from. Now, I could mess with this stuff, but you know what? I don't really want a cloud texture on here. I'm going to actually put a picture on that I have available. But you could go in here and you could mess with a lot of different built-in texture generators in Blender and experiment with how they look. And my recommendation is to read the chapter in the book and you'll see some of these examples spelled out. Right now, I'm going to go and pick image or movie. You can actually put a movie on as a texture, but we're just going to work with an image today. So I told it that I want to do an image. Well, if I scroll down through my panels, there's my preview. Nothing's in there yet. And here is the image panel where I can open a new image. So we're going to go to open an image. I'm going to go out to my C drive and I'm going to go into my texture mapped folder. Now, I want to view it as thumbnails. So I'm going to change my view display up here to thumbnails. And you can actually download these from the CD School's website where you can download Blender. This is a library of materials that I've put together over the years. I've downloaded off the internet and I found some great examples and we've actually made some of these ourselves. For my ground, I have a folder called Natural Surfaces. And for my texture, I think I want to do this one that's dirtgrass.jpg. I like that texture. I put it on. There's what it looks like. We hit F12, render a new picture. And what do we get? Well, now it's starting to look a little bit more like something, but it's really stretched out. Well, let's see. Where can I find my repeat patterns? Okay, what do I have here? There's image sampling. No, that's not really where I want to go. Let's look at image mapping. Oh, well, right here now I see a repeat, an X and a Y. So if I want to see what my sample looks like as I do it, I'm going to close up some of these other panels so I can actually see my sample the same time I hit the X and Y repeat. And if I go up to say 5 on each of those, I'm repeating my pattern 5 times each. You can even mirror it on the X and Y axis. That is good if you have a texture that doesn't repeat itself very well, where it looks like it has a line. Now when I re-render, my scene's looking a lot better. It's still very dark. I think I need some better lighting in here yet to make this look better. So, escape out of that. I'm going to take one of my lamps, and I'm going to hit Shift D and duplicate it again. Pull it back there further, so it now looks a little bit better. Let's hit F12, render another picture, and now my scene is much brighter. Okay, so now we've got our landscape, and I kind of like the way that looks. And we can actually go in here. With texturing, you can also go in here and take care of a feature called applying a normal, which will actually take darks and lights within your texture and actually give you the illusion of pushing them up and down. And what you're going to see with your normal setting, it's down and underneath influence and geometry. If I check that and I drag the normal slider up, it may be difficult to see on this rough tutorial, but on your own model, when you hit F12, you'll actually get a little bit of depth and a little bit of definition, and the texture will actually look more rugged. So with some textures it works better than others. So it's something that you want to experiment with and see what happens to make that work. So now let's start working on some of the texturing of our plane. Okay, so this is going to be our water plane. We'll go back up here to the top of our list and we're going to add a new texture to this. Now I'm going to keep this actually as a cloud texture to see what we can do with it. We may also want to try to experiment with like a texture called a stucky. In fact, let's do the stucky first. We'll take our stucky texture, and a stucky is basically just something that can represent ripple to even like a rough surface on like a desktop or something. You can take the mapping and the size of it down to really try to change the way that that stucky texture is going to be generated. So let's see, with my stucky texture, we'll hit F12. And we're going to get a render, and again, we get that nice pink color in there mixed with our blue. Well, let's scroll down our panel here. I'm going to take this blue and I'm going to make it, or this pink, I'm going to make it some type of like a darker, colder gray. I want this to be like a dark, stormy night type scene. I'm going to go with a darker gray for that. Alright, hit F12 again, render a new picture. So now you've got like a lighter and darker bluish gray color. Okay, now here's a good example where the normal plays into a factor. Right now it looks very flat. If I look at my geometry underneath influence, right now it's set for a factor of 1, Let's take it up a little bit higher to about 1.5. Let's hit F12, and if you notice now, it looks like you have a little bit of a wave effect going on. So that's kind of a nice, neat effect. It's pretty large though, so let's go back out here and let's look at the size of my mapping. And if I take these down a little bit, hit F12, let's see what we have now. Okay, the wave is actually changing in here a little bit. Alright, so let's see, that would be my main Stucky to work with. Let's see. Turbulence and size might be a nice factor to play with underneath the Stucky itself. And you can actually change the different Stucky textures that you use. Okay, so now my size is a little lower on here. And wow, that looks a little too much norm. So we're going to take that normal setting back down a little bit. Let's try 0.5. You know, depending on where your camera's at, how your scene looks at, that looks a little bit nicer in there. So we're getting some wave in there. And you can even try different Stucky textures, like the basis itself. This is kind of an interesting one. I'm not going to use it for my water, but the Veroni crackle gives you like a little crackle effect to it. Neat thing that you can do, but I'm going to turn that back into just Blender Original. And again, if you read the book, we talk about some other examples in there. I'm going to go up here now, and I'm going to actually go to my second texture channel down below and hit New. And this one I'm going to actually use as a cloud. Okay, and again, as I go down through here, you'll probably want to change the color effect of the cloud. We'll do some type of slightly lighter blue in there. Let's hit F12, see what we have. Okay, and that's going to give you a little bit more of a color variance to your water. And again, I'm going to hit the geometry for a normal. I'm just going to keep it set for 1 right off the bat, and that's going to give you a little more ripple in here. Let's take the normal up a little bit higher on that. Okay, and it just gives you kind of a secondary waveform on that. And this is something that we can actually animate later on. That looks pretty good. I think we're going to stick with that for right now. And again, feel free to play with that all you want to. We'll save that. And now we're going to open up the lighthouse. Okay, so now our lighthouse scene. Let's start worrying about materials and textures on here. The first thing is that the lighthouse is all connected together. And probably the easiest way for